Всем привет, это проект Alpha.
Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman. You're watching War Diary with Alexey Arestovich. Alexey is online with us. Yes, hello, good evening. Alright, we are figuring out our current situation that is happening this week. The front collapse, I want to start with this. General Marchenko is being quoted by a lot of Western media, and not only him, many other people are requesting if Alexey can comment on the situation on the front. Do you think, in your view, the collapse or crumbling of our front is the reality that we are living in? Well, we are living in it already. We have warned those who listened way in advance. And there'll be probably more consequences coming later because looking at the decisions being made, nobody is really making the right conclusions of this situation and everything will only be exacerbating. The key decisions are missing. Additional levels of our military are missing that could improve our operational activities. Fortified fallback positions are missing. Instead of refitting the old brigades and using their experience, they are creating dozens of new brigades. So important decisions have not been made. Weak decisions, problem decisions, they continue with pushing them and the situation continues to exacerbate. This will end up pretty badly. This is likely going to end with catastrophe. As for the front, the hottest part is Kurakhovo protrusion. The enemy took Selidovo pretty much without resistance. Yes, here it is. We're bringing it up on the map, over by the mouse pointer. In many parts of the front, our infantry is not really fighting, actively countering the enemy. They're just sitting in the trenches and avoiding FPVs and other attacks. It is difficult to find active infantry that is eager to go and fight and attack the enemy. This is the result of forced mobilization because you can catch somebody on the street, dress them up as the soldier, give even him the AK, but it doesn't make the person eager to fight. And the way we're conducting our mobilization, it devoids people of any desire to fight. That's why in all the eastern part of the front, it's very rare when you see the infantry that actually is going and fighting and actively countering the enemy. It went so far that officers are exchanging videos showing that there are actually some infantry fighting, but those are rare in their chat. As for the infantry who can fight, they're still holding their positions. You can see that on the front. And their chances to continue holding them are 5-1 if they still have the spirit and training and resources to do it. Now, as for Kurakhovo, the enemy is continuing with their offensive operation. It's several kilometers deep and about 400 yards wide. And it is a smart area to attack because their area of attack is covered by two rivers on the east and on the west. And it's difficult to reach them to counter their activities. There are techniques that our army could use to cut their pincers, but we have not seen that technique used during this war by our command, and I don't think we'll see it now. Despite that, Russian side is actually acting rather smart, by the book in this area, and they're protecting themselves from being cut. You can also see there is a big group down south. One is near Velika Novoselka, to the right of that map, and then the other one is here down towards Orekhov. They aggregated enough forces there, but they're not moving them yet. They probably will activate them when they see that our reserves are moving to the cauldrons on the eastern front. When we move our reserves to counter the crumbling front on the east, they probably will start their operations in the south, and they'll trying to catch us on this simple maneuver. And I understand we can screw things up one time, right? Maybe two times. But when we're repeating the same mistakes a dozen times over and over again, then it's your destiny and your ineptitude. You can see that we do have an interesting position here, Constantinople. It's only 8 kilometers from here in the south in Shakhtersk to Constantinople. And mortars, company mortars can already reach it at the edge of their reach. And that's when they can cut the road feeding Kurakhovo group If they succeed in cutting off this road, we'll have a big cauldron on the Eastern Front, on the southern part of it. I want to be cursing throughout this whole stream today, but I'm doing my best to hold. All right, Alexey, let's talk about the colors and dates maybe on the front, what it would look like. It's difficult, Nikolai, to really predict the dates and how colorful the crumbling will be in certain parts. This will be borderline faulting our own troops in this regard, predicting where they can fall, so I don't want to go into that depth, and plus you do need to know the actual numbers on both sides. And it remains to be a question whether we will have enough brains to leave Kurakhovo area before it becomes too difficult and when we'll be shot at while withdrawing, or do we have enough wits to withdraw from this area in advance? Well, we had similar situations in Kursk district, in Gorniakovsky group. Well, Nikolai, even looking at the map of Deep State, we can say that in Kursk direction, our troops are not controlling roughly about the half of what they occupied initially. And the situation there is very complex, because having the forces that we have there, with the level of motivation and readiness that they have, the task to hold this territory is very difficult. We needed to make this raid to do that. We needed to gather prisoners of war to exchange for our people, and then in my opinion, we should have left it. Instead, we're preferring to hold it, and the destiny of this group is probably pretty grim, as many others. On Chasov Yar, the enemy crossed the canal, and they're slowly developing their offensive on the town. How were we defending this canal, and why did we let them go through and cross it, which is a natural barrier? That's a separate discussion. On Borovaya, over here, right, the enemy has already separated our group of troops in two parts, had got to the water reservoir, and they're approaching Kupyansk, and they're drawing another cauldron here around Kupyansk. So overall, on the whole front line, we have about 4 potential big cauldrons, operative tactical size cauldrons, and a lot of smaller encirclements. You can see how Russian troops are pushing on the flanks and forcing our troops to either withdraw at the risk of being encircled, or find themselves encircled or semi-encircled and waste troops attempting to leave. And over again, the situation repeats, and we continue to make the same mistakes, exacerbating our position. I don't know what else can be done with these people and this army and this government to make them learn these lessons. A bunny would have learned these counteractions and how to behave. I mean, you can train a cockroach to do tricks for you, but unfortunately, our command is untrainable. If they're refusing to train, to learn from life, from other lessons, their life will teach them the way it can. In this situation, most likely with death. All right, so looking at Kupyansk and the other areas that are threatened, I think the logic of what you're saying is that there is a river going through Kupyansk, and we can see that Russian troops have already gotten to the river, so it's already locked in the north and in the south, and the only way for our troops to cross from the left to right side of Oskol is through bridges. Well, Russians have already destroyed the bridges, Nikolai, because they've done about a year ago. They've been quite witty, in quotes. They destroyed the bridges that we have. And they destroyed a lot of bridges that they need to now rebuild wherever they recapture territory, but now these bridges are also destroyed. We have made certain things to remedy that situation, but unfortunately it's impossible to use the temporary crossings that we established to the same effectivity as the normal bridge would have provided. Would have been smart in this situation is to withdraw to the left bank of this river and put them in the disadvantageous position. That would have been much more difficult for them to try to cross it. And instead, we are holding them in 4 or 5 cauldrons, risking being surrounded in different parts of the front, because that's how we fight, I guess. We're smart like this. Our central command. I'm waiting for one thing, that the war would be over and I would allow myself to speak out loud everything that I think, because right now I have to moderate myself. I am implying a certain degree of self-censorship without using certain descriptors and characteristics that our military political leadership utterly deserves in this situation. That's why I have to use metaphors. People say that if you chop the cockroach's head off, he can still be telling fairy tales about the borders of 1991 for several hours. I think we are worse than them, because we still continue talking about that for longer than that, for a year and a half already, on the same scenario, getting caught by Russians on the front, hitting our missing head over a very real wall that exists. All right, President Zelensky had said this week that if we freeze the conflict now, it's going to present a huge risk. A risk of what, Nikolai? According to the words of President, the risk of Russian economy and military industrial complex continuing to work will provide more risks for Ukraine, and we need to continue blocking them and sanctioning them and even depleting their resources, because if we do not do that, Russia will eventually collect enough resources to continue. Otherwise, we may actually run their resources out. Oh my God, Nikolai, I need to get myself collected here. Alexey, you are strong, you can. Turning on my chi and kundalini, and okay, I think now I can say a few words about our president, and not the words that I will say when the war is over, but something more suiting for the media channel. Let's look at the facts. When a year ago, Nikolai, you and I were discussing that this is exactly what is going to happen on a lot of different parameters indicating towards it. The overall mood that we're facing is that Arestovich is a traitor. He sold his soul to Khodorkovsky and Putin at the same time. Oh, right, and Abramovich. Right. And one needs to acknowledge either Arestovich is super effective and he destroyed the capacity of Ukraine to defend itself. Then one can ask a question why Ukraine didn't buy him if he is so effective. So he would be destroying Russian information field and motivation for war, etc. Or the second option, perhaps Arestovich was correct and he just made smarter conclusions, that he was actually trying to point to for many of our constituents, our citizens here, our Ukrainians, since the Russian occupation of Crimea, that certain mistakes on our side will lead to certain consequences. And by the way, we are facing now that there is BRICS summit happening in Kazan in Russia, which in Ukraine we're calling unsuccessful and ineffective, and everybody is supposedly laughing at Russia here in Ukraine. But Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lavrov, right, he came out, and they're attacking him for his speech and the way he presented certain statements about BRICS. And they're failing to see that Russia jumped out of the trap of isolation and is holding a huge summit on their territory on the level of heads of states. So no isolation, no blocking of Russian economy, at least not from the south and southeast. And they're using, again, I need to concentrate myself to not use cuss words, but I want to say that our very strong-willed people here in Ukraine continue with the rhetoric about possibly isolating Russia after Russia has received several heads of nations and the head of United Nations. And it has already been published in the West. The head of NATO, Rutte, is also going to Russia to see about negotiations with them. And one can see that Europe has actually purchased so much oil and gas from Russia over time that actually allowed Russia to fund about a year and a half of this war, just from these proceeds of Europe purchasing energy sources. That's why when we talk isolation, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist not only in the south and southeast, or the global south. to Russia, but it doesn't quite even work on the West as well, because the West continues to purchase energy sources from Russia. And what isolation are we talking about? And we even have some bright people talking about the fact that Russia needs to be split. In Ukrainian language, we have a very good saying: while the fat one is getting slimmer, the thin one will die. That's exactly what's happening right now. Headless and brainless idiots who are saying that, and you can see that in Ukrainian news often, and they think that they're analysts or intellectuals, that in the war of attrition, Ukraine has a chance to exert Russia, to deplete Russia. I would say they're not even ostriches. They're not putting their heads in the sand. They're probably putting their heads in their butts, because only there you can find that vision of the future, which is so fantastical. Given that trade with Russia is still there, the head of United Nations and heads of other countries are visiting. And besides that, Russia is not going to agree with being weaker. They're actually building their military-industrial complex. And aid to us is dwindling meantime. All of the Western allies and analysts are talking about that. There was a fresh article in The Economist today exactly speaking about dwindling supplies to Ukraine. Are we setting an experiment that needs to show that our will is stronger than reality? As a specialist who has been conducting a seminar, The Power of Will, for dozens of years, I want to say that it exists, but it is not how it works, guys. Willpower does not work like that. Right, I understand, Alexey, that it needs to be directed at something concrete. Right, Nikolai, it only works when it is very well connected with reality. When the will is directed at illusory goals, it does not work. There is another logical conclusion here. All these media people, all these figures on different channels, they continue saying that we will win and we'll get to the borders of 91. They're speeding Ukraine as a burning train for some monetary or other benefits of their own. And I don't know which one is better, when they're dumb and they don't get what they're talking about, or when they're not dumb and they're just evil and have ulterior motives. If you remember, on the 26th of September, 25th of September 2023, I said what will be, verbatim. The questions of draft, the questions of operative command on the front, the questions of motivation, the questions of what Russia is doing, and strategic decisions they made and we didn't. That was already understandable back then. Over the last year, we have lost several tens of thousands of people dead. We have probably lost another 100,000 troops wounded and crippled. We have destroyed our economy more. We have lost more territories and we continue losing them. Our front is collapsing. In Kharkov, we have conversations now that methods how they are drafting people in Kharkov, they are not different from occupation. I have a lot of relatives in Kharkov, my friends are there, and they're discussing openly that nothing is different. If Russians would have occupied Kharkov, they would be looking for traitors and potential dangerous elements. Same thing that what is happening now. We are looking, apparently, as a country, the drafting commission is looking for people on the streets, beating them up and sending them to the front. And this is not only Kharkov. All that is for what, again? What are we defending here? We are, in my opinion, are a sick society and a country that is defaulting. And the main default is not economic or managerial. I think our biggest default is an inability to answer the question why. There are four key questions that a person or society is answering. Who am I? Where am I? What are my relations with the environment and things surrounding me and people? And what is that for? And society that is incapable to answer the question, what is that for? Or a human who cannot answer this question is destined to fall apart. It perhaps is more humane to shoot it, to off it, than let it be tortured and crumble over time. Why do we use all these methods to our citizens, to the army that we're building, to the perspectives that do we have them? And that question, what is that for, is written over all of the graves of our soldiers who perished on the front. And I repeat my question again. If it was all clear about a year ago, why have we continued to face more dire straits a year later? So that Putin would have jumped out of the international isolation. There were no BRICS summits, there was no Yalta agreements. We could have traded for much better terms than today. Why were we pulling it through so long in stupid attacks near the groves? Why were we losing kids in the birthing houses and hospitals being bombed? Why did we suffer all the destruction of energy systems and we're going down deeper, letting Putin to go up, when we could have solved things much better a year ago? And now we will still have to go back to the table, but only in a much weaker position. What for? Many people are posting the cemeteries with Ukrainian flags on it, with hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of dead. On each of the graves you can write what for. We are idiots, Nikolai. We do not answer this question. We cannot answer it. I think we are worse at this moment than the headless cockroaches. We are some sort of a fundamental aggregation of idiocy on this planet. I have a very deep imagination. I know history. I learn psychology. I've been studying it for years. I've seen different things in human souls, but what is happening in Ukraine exceeds even the limits of my imagination. It is not fitting into my senses. I have to do something with me to start to continue understanding it, because this is even beyond idiocy, Koля. I don't even know what words to pick to what we are doing as a country, our military political leadership, and our society at large. There is an opinion, Alexey, that actually contradict what President is saying, and these opinions mostly are in the armed forces. Here I can read the words of the 2nd Storm Corps of the 2nd Storm Brigade, Kukharchuk, who said that the worst option for us is if the front will collapse and will be occupied and we'll have some partisan warfare, and I hope that as a result of it we'll be able to keep some territory. A mid-level option would be if it is frozen on the current front line, and it'll give us some time to use in different fashion, and then perhaps we can use that time effectively if we are lucky to have good leadership. And the interviewer asks Kukharchuk if we will not probably have 6 years, we'll have maybe 2 or 3 years. And he answers that even in half a year, we could have realized a lot of things, could have done a lot of things if somebody had the will and the plan to do it. And that resonates with your thesis that you've been talking about that whole time. And it looks like soldiers and officers are supportive of these opinions that you expressed. They are against an opinion that freezing the line is a bad option for us. And they see the rhetoric coming out of the Central Command. They see that they're not interested in changing the situation, but are rather interested in exploiting it as is, which is horrible for the armed forces of Ukraine, who understand that they need at least half a year to breathe out, to reformat a few things, to refit and train more troops. Do you think, Alexey, this opinion may affect the opinion of Zelensky, of our president? I understand that Arestovich may be on a poo-poo list for him, but maybe he will react to these opinions. Do you think they have some weight? Well, that's a question, Nikolai, how well it is coordinated with the office as well. Because that statement is pretty open, Nikolai, and you need to prepare population to possible concessions on the front. And 3rd Brigade, 3rd Group is actually very visible. So they cannot be written off as traitors. They're very active and effective on the front. So it's interesting to hear that coming from them. All these Kukharchuks actually accused me back a year ago that I'm a traitor. Now I have a question to them. Are they the traitors themselves? Or the rebuilding plan for economy and everything in Ukraine is freeze the line, rebuild the economy and then jail Arestovich because he's guilty of seeing things a couple years in advance, and that is unforgivable. And yeah, it does sound, I think, they're presenting a peace plan, modernize, freeze the front line, and put Arestovich to jail to make things work. Yeah, I see he said that on the 3rd of October, a year ago, he was cussing you with all kind of words. Yeah, exactly. I remember him. He was jumping there, huffing and puffing, telling everybody how traitor am I. Now I think he deserves to be fed exactly same thing, his own words into his mouth, and ask whether he became a little smarter after having commanded for about a year on the front, or is he concerned about getting into cauldron to Russia and then get to Russian jail and to get acquainted better with baseball bats from behind, how they often did with Azov fighters while they were imprisoned. Is that something he's looking for? Well, President is saying that freezing the front is not a good option for Ukraine, and you're saying that he's also could be leading some narrative through Kukharchuk and some other figures who might fall for some of these statements. What is the gameplay right now? What do you think it is? Are we going to resist to the public opinion for a while? What are we waiting here for? Do we have a plan B? Nikolai, the main thing that I think our military political leadership is waiting is elections of the president in the United States, which are about to happen in a few days. About a third of Americans have already voted. They have an option to vote preliminary, early voting, and depending upon the results, they'll be building their politics. Today, Yermak is going to meet with Sullivan, and there probably are some agreements. They're waiting for the results of the elections to realize Plan A or Plan B. This is a fantastic story, but I have only one question. Where is our independence in this picture? Why are we incapable to conduct policy in our own interest? And we have governed so far that we have to depend on the voting of American people to define the future of Ukrainian people. That is not what I said when I gave an oath to Ukraine when I was becoming an officer. I gave an oath to defend independent and free country, and I don't think we are right now. Alexey, I don't see how presidential elections in the US will affect us directly. Well, Nikolai, there are plans to finish this war, and there are different sets of motivation ruling one type of plan or the other. If Trump wins, that'll be realization of one plan. If Democrats, it'll be a different one. Both ways, the aid will be dwindling, but with a different set of motives and end goals. I only don't understand why Ukrainian soldiers and citizens need to be dying while the United States are figuring out some architecture. And why don't we say ourselves, okay, pause the front, let's modernize whatever we have. Freeze along the front line. Right, I think you're correct there. And as a result of our president's visit to the United States, there is a publication of New York Times discussing the lobbying effort of Zelensky. They're saying that a real audience of the victory plan, according to some military analysts and diplomats, Mr. Zelensky can use his appeals to parliament to show Ukrainians that he had done everything and to prepare them to the possibility that they will have to sign some peace deal and give them a convenient scapegoat, which is going to be the West again. Exactly like you said. And when did you say that? Did I say that? You said that before his visit, Nikolai, and also about a half a year ago, right? Yeah, and you also doubled it right before his visit. Okay, so United States generally understand Zelensky's game from all angles. They understand that Zelensky wants to make scapegoat out of the West in general. What are they discussing over there where you are? They're not really discussing anything. They make their own conclusions. They understand what's happening in Ukraine, and then they're in the optional field of finishing the war so that Ukraine would not collapse. And they're preparing to provide extra aid if the front will collapse fully and take some extraordinary measures. And they're making a big list of things to remember, speaking delicately here about the number of failed promises and violated agreements by Ukraine. And that list is long. And they're not evil in their mind, but they have very good memory, as they're saying. And they have made their conclusions, and there will be time when they'll be making actual steps based on these conclusions. All right, Alexey, so talking about these steps, we have a strange publication this week where they actually mentioned the brother of the speaker of Nikolai Stefanchuk of our Supreme Rada, our Ukrainian Congress, who told journalists that were with him, I understand there were journalists from Poland, and they mentioned the Polish publication here. In a small circle during dinner, Nikolai Stefanchuk said that elections of the President of Ukraine will occur in 6 to 9 months window, but according to Ukrainian constitution, the war needs to be over. Right, confirms Stefanchuk. And when they ask him how will the war be over, he answers that Russia will have to give back all the territories that they captured since the time of separation and will pay reparations. And when he was questioned whether this scenario is real or not, he said it is real. And when they asked him whether they can publish his words, he said that of course yes. And yet today, Nikolai, he's coming to the media and saying that he's being attacked on the information field and it's a provocation. So, appealing to our Ukrainian compatriots, I'm saying these are the people that are ruling our country. This is the brother of the head of the Congress. And there are two options here. He either believes all this madness about reparations and return of territories, or he is lying consciously to those whom he communicates with. And you guys can pick the option that you prefer. And don't forget to vote for these people again when you will go to these elections somewhere 6 to 9 months from today. All right, so we touched on this. I want to go back to BRICS summit and to detail a few things about it. President of Ukraine said that the summit collapsed, but I'm looking at the picture coming from BRICS. I cannot say that there is any failure. I can say that isolation has probably broken, and now they have a pretty big bloc that is meeting despite all these sanctions from the West. And it definitely is not the same pole as the West was before. This is a new pole that they're trying to form. Now, if we do not take Russian achievements, but we take the achievements of the entire global South that is represented by BRICS countries, it is definitely not guided by exclusively Russian interests, right? Even more than that, Nikolai, as Modi, Prime Minister of India, said, he's saying that he doesn't think that they need to make an anti-West bloc out of BRICS. This actually is a very smart position. I think in the whole picture, there are only two politicians who are very logical and who continually implement a very defined path. Take Putin, he is following his statements. We may be in disagreement, we may consider him a mortal enemy, but he continues to implement with iron will the elements that he was going for, creation of the multipolar world, and the fact that the West now is talking to him as he wanted and discussing the interests of the West and Russia. But Putin is our enemy. I'm just acknowledging his qualities. And Modi is more of an ally, a friend to our country, and he's continually pushing the narrative of being neutral to Ukraine. Our media presents it as a weakness. In reality, I think it's a strength. And he's basically saying that I'm not playing by the rules set by the West or the South or Putin. He is indicating that he's staying very independent in his views. And he indicated that to Putin as well, that he should not be dreaming to make BRICS anti-Western bloc. What I would say is that the fact itself that the Global South understood that they do have their own interests, that these interests are joint, and that they are ready to resist West with different measures from economic, cultural, even down to military methods, so that the West would shrink their area of influence and would have stopped dictating the agenda, and the world really became global. New Big Yalta is de facto concluded. There are only two countries that keep breaking the rules, Ukraine and Israel. But Israel is doing it within the ranks of what is allowed and the capabilities they have, while Ukraine is continuously trying to break through that zone, through the borders. And I continue to express that it would be a good option if we had enough material support to these motions. But instead, when the world is agreeing to listen to us and to our proposals, we bring such idiotic offers to the table that they don't even know what to do with it. Now, if we have suggested something smart, first of all, to establish good relations with the global south, that would have been a very different communication. And the president himself said that the participating party in our negotiations, India can take this position and be the negotiator between Russia and Ukraine. And they are most prospective and most neutral in this regard. They have long-term interests in Ukraine, and they have long-term interest in this situation, and they don't want to stand in anti-West position because the West is seeing India as the new China. While India has a big influence on Russia, and they do have some influence on China and the global South at large, they have to consider India's position, and they're still friendly to Ukraine, and they're taking position of neutrality towards the West and Western sanctions. This is treasure for us in our current situation. This would have been a really good ally for us. In the next dozen years, I think India should be in the focal point for us to build good relations and economic relations, not excluding other countries that can help us, as we talked a few streams ago, to be more stable. I don't know if India would want to be an intermediary in these negotiations. They may have their own reservations about it, but it's a good position that potentially can be very profitable for them, so we'll see. But in any case, we need to continue this vector, but we need brains to do that. We'll see. Alexey, President's plans or his discussions about possible peace summit in India. We can see that these plans were presented with some spontaneity. I'm not sure they're even agreed upon with India itself. But do you think this is something realistic, or the second summit can be forgotten as an entity, and even if it happens, it will not be like President Zelensky is seeing it? We can see, Nikolai, on the Western press that neither a peace summit nor our proposals are being reviewed with any serious credence by anyone. Of course, they will not be talking about destroying the summit or attacking Ukraine directly in their plans, but they're expressing very skeptical opinions about the viability of this summit. I want to remind that this summit is even a larger meeting than Ramstein, but even Ramstein is being postponed and moved to an unknown date. So what peace summit if we're not even conducting Ramstein? I don't know. Modi is a realist, and I don't think he will be supporting an empty initiative that has no filling. Right now, we should be talking not about peace summit, but about direct negotiations between Russia and Ukraine based on Istanbul format that is very beneficial to us, because real situation on the ground is not in our favor, and it will continue dwindling and becoming more difficult at risk of collapsing. So having such a strong intermediary as India, I think we should be fighting for that. And this is one of the most favorable options for us to get out of this difficult situation, because if we continue to be stubborn, we will only be facing more difficult consequences. I'm skeptic here. I think we'll continue as a country to exacerbate things. And since the Big Yalta group is basically talking about peace treaty around New Year, I'm expecting some big provocation from our side in the near future. Something that is supposed to disrupt that, because it is very obvious what kind of politics are we implementing, and this politics is definitely not at peace initiatives, and we probably are looking to get several tens of thousands more dead Ukrainians, more destruction to our energy system and to our infrastructure. Now, appealing to our citizens, dear Ukrainians, Just dump your presuppositions here. Do you really like that? Is that what you want? Alex, I think this war cannot be liked by anyone in any fashion. Right, Nikolai, that's the question I'm asking. What for is all that? Now let's dump the ironical or evil Arestovich and let's speak as open as we can. Each of you personally try to answer the question, what for? And this provocation will be the one that I talked about with the probability of 99.9%. Russians will go berserk, they'll destroy our energy system more, they'll start attacking us on the front, our partners will be in a state of deep concern and probably will be diminishing their support of Ukraine. Global South, again, will also be pissed because they agreed to certain things and now they likely will be postponed because of our behavior. What does it give us? I think the biggest problem here, Alexey, is that we are declaring our attention to the Global South from the beginning, that we need to conduct some independent politics there, that we need to be building some mutually beneficial relations with them, with the countries of the South. We're seeing that these countries are getting united. And if we manage to violate that Yalta agreement that includes even these countries, we will turn the whole world against us, right? Yes, Nikolai, and it won't be the first time. So in one thing, when it was not structured, when things were not clear, when countries did not make their decisions, who is defending and who's for what, now everything is structured. We are basically the only country that is in disagreement with this, right? Yeah, exactly. That's when you face the question, what for? Okay, if we compare ourselves with Israel, because we even denounced Gutierrez in his visit because Israel is behaving the same way. But Israel has its own logic in their actions. Israel has a capability to act proactively today, and we de facto do not have that. We're in a different position. On the territory of Israel, there are no hot warfare happening. Infantry and tanks and missiles are not attacking them at their own territory. It's Israel that is making some expeditionary operations in Gaza or in Lebanon. Right, Israel, Nikolai, has military advantage over their enemies. We don't have that, exactly. Our front is collapsing. Israel is acting within the framework of agreements, communicating their decisions and verifying what's capable, what's available, what's not, what's possible, what's not. We're always acting in violation of this. Israel can refit itself up to 50% with equipment and military stuff and ammo and everything. We cannot do that even for 20%. And then the bigger question that we see here is, who is a bigger fool? I think that's a rhetorical question, right? President Zelensky said another phrase, and it's a strange one to me. He said, please, if Brazil and China have some vision and they have some offers, then of course, please, but do that in our format because we're the ones fighting the war. So it looks like since we have the war here and you, China and Brazil see something, then come to us and let's negotiate with us and try to convince us that your solution is better. Because the war is here and it's our format and we need to be making that decision. Is that pretty removed from adequacy, or am I saying it wrong, Alexey? There's a good joke about that, Nikolai, when one of the Civil War Russian commanders is sitting in New York near the bank, and he has another comrade of his passing by saying, hey, could I borrow some money from you? And he's selling some sunflower seeds. He's saying, see the bank behind me? We have an agreement. I don't loan money and they don't sell sunflower seeds. So that's kind of how I see us. This is about our capability to be a subject, to be subjective in these policies. And we're not expressing an initiative. We're not visiting China and Brazil. We're not talking to them, figuring out how we can jointly let us listen to you. No. We are suggesting them that we have heard about their plan, and if they're interested, they should visit us with that plan. Is that the matter of being adequate in this regard? Or we seemingly have some subjectivity and we think it's heavy enough to behave like this? Well, there are two kinds of that, Nikolai. One is when you earn it. When you earn money, for example, and you know what you want and you buy your Ferrari because you wanted that. And then there is another subjectivity when you're 6 or 5 years old and you fall on your back in a supermarket, you thump your feet and you scream and yell and put your parents in a very uncomfortable position because they don't want to buy you some Disney toy. And I think our comrades, for the most part, have the second subjectivity. They think that the whole world need to come up with money and resources and buy them this toy or Disneyland. And then they blame that cunning world that do not want to turn to help Ukraine and fulfill our needs because we have suffered from Russia and we want what we want. This is a total treason from the side of the world. They're all scoundrels. They still haven't presented us the state of Florida with Disneyland and Alaska, you know? And it'll be wrapped as treason by the West towards Ukraine. We had everything ready, we had a plan, but those treacherous Westies have not given us the resource. Right. We're trying to portray ourselves very subjective because we want, right? And that's what makes you a subject. Who can denounce our subjectivity in this regard? Well, look, Alexey, apparently we are making decisions on our own, right? So your pretense about us not doing it, I think one can counter that with these idiotic decisions. Right, we are deciding everything as a 4 or 5-year-old who decided that he will never die and grandma and grandpa will not die either. Right, I think that's our level of subjectivity. And then God just says, yes, sir, and fulfills all. That's exactly how it works. You know it, right? Exactly, right after he made a decision. And if the God is not fulfilling these asks, then there is no God and God is horrible. This is the level of processes that is happening in the heads of many Ukrainians. And as we see, Ukrainian leadership specifically. Oh, hang on, there is one more. Russia also needs to collapse. That's another one from Ukraine. Russia absolutely has to fall apart, and we need to divide it and put our patrols in Moscow, and also take a piece of the Far East, perhaps. Yeah, Khabarovsk is going to be ours, right? Put that in a slogan. In that same publication by New York Times, where Zelensky is blaming the West and everything, or is about to, Kyiv is looking for Plan B. They're saying that American bureaucrats in private order have expressed some irritation with Zelensky victory plan, calling it unrealistic and fully dependent on the Western aid. Well, that's subjectively so, we talked about it. But an interesting moment that in one part that was not made public, Zelensky suggested that Ukraine get a package of non-nuclear countermeasures to Russia, such as Tomahawk missiles, which have about 1,500 miles range, and it's about 5 times longer than ATACMS missiles that were given to Ukraine. And Ukraine got an answer from American bureaucrats that the resources are limited and they likely will never get them. So I understand why we're doing this, I guess, but why, again? Tomahawk, Disneyland, and a pretty hat, right? A foil hat, a tinfoil hat, Alexey, sounds like. This would have been so funny if it was not so tragic, if real people and real territories in real country, real servicemen and civilians of townships and villages were not paying for all that with their lives and livelihoods. Look, Nikolai, everything is very simple. Ukrainians, in my view, Ukrainians will never be able to say that they were never warned, because there is a fact of our stream existing, and we got millions of views here. So what are we paying for with millions of lives? I would say we're paying for understanding. When smart people who see further and know more, and they advise us, we don't hear, because how can we acknowledge somebody being smarter than us? Because a kid at 5 years, he of course knows better than his parents, right? How to live and what to do. That's one. Second, and still, you cannot say that Arestovich is smarter than average Ukrainian, right? Never. And the second point here is a very interesting one, that regardless of the warning, it took about a year for them to come to fruition and start talking about maybe possibly Ukraine will lose and we need to do something. We need to stop this war and reboot. And the fact that our screams about getting Disneyland will probably not work. So when next time, when you see the funeral of a soldier or a dead child, how about you not say damned Russians? Or maybe you do say that, but also add to it that also in this coffin there is 200 grams of my misunderstanding and desire to understand. I was warned, but I decided not to believe that. And it took me a year and more dead bodies to get convinced that life is more complex than I was thinking. Or maybe more simple. So in every coffin, there is at least 200 grams or maybe even a dozen kilos of your misunderstanding, dear compatriots. You are the ones who have also killed all those people that are coming back in coffins. They could have lived. And yet many of our citizens still do not want to understand the situation. And they're adding these kilos to that weight. All right. In parallel with that, Alexey, there are some strange stories happening with the General Command and data about manufacturers of different UAV systems. Yuri Butusov in his Facebook is publishing why the names of engineers and leaders in General Command are not published who have leaked the data about our UAV systems to Russians. We have knowledge that Ukraine prepared a big presentation about the drones and systems that are being used by Ukraine, and that presentation also had direct contacts, specifications, addresses, phone numbers of all the companies and people providing these materials and UAVs for Ukraine. About a month ago it was leaked, and SBU of Ukraine is failing to present names of people who were behind that leak and who caused this precious information to be leaked to our foes in Russia. Alexey, do you think this is a valid point? I have a working version here, Nikolai, and it's a little different from what Yuri is thinking. I don't think General Command is the one who leaked it. I think they formed some terms for the UAV manufacturing, so some of the UAV manufacturers did not get to the auction, and they likely probably took revenge, and they had access to this presentation, being part of it. They probably leaked it, and that's it. Then why do you think this sensitive information had to be aggregated into a single document? Oh, to boast, Nikolai, because we are the country about money and likes. On one hand, they do love when their stuff is being liked in a social media, and second, it's about money because government will buy all that. That's 20%. And other 80% of manufacturers failed to pay enough or were naive that they just get there because they produce something good. And I think some of them have probably leaked that data. Do you think it has to be the subject of investigation, responsibility? Yeah, of course it should be, but we have another interesting piece of information this week that only 1.5% of corruptionaires in Ukraine get a verdict from the court. So do you think even if there'll be an investigation, do you think it'll ever get to the court? Sun Tzu had said very precisely about 5,000 years ago, I think, if you want to understand the system, understand who gets rewarded and who gets punished and for what. So if in the system we have corruption group that are stealing and making money on the blood of the soldiers and they're not getting punished and they're actually getting rewarded, that system is doomed. And I want to say one more thing that all of us need to understand here. Of course, Ukrainians want to destroy the eternal enemy. But unfortunately, each stereotypical Ukrainian wants to prevail over his neighbor, especially if the neighbor is different, if he speaks a different language, goes to a different church. And I think we're losing that word to Russia because, and that's only the second cause. The first cause, while we're using it, is that we want to win over the other Ukrainians. That feature of our character, unfortunately, is present every century of our history. So one can ask, who's the biggest enemy, right? When they leaked this document about UAVs to Russians, their task was to win over the opponent on the competitor. But the fact that Russians will get everybody's contact, that they didn't think about, right? Like in that anecdote, when the god asked a fella, I'll fulfill any prayer that you ask me of, but the neighbor will get it twice. And the fella asked the god to remove one of his eyes. That's a simple answer. Why is that happening here like this? You know, Alexey, this whole agenda has such a dooming feeling. Do you think we're doing the right thing here? Yes, I think we are doing the right thing because somebody needs to say things, to name things the way they are. In this mad bus that is on fire and is about to fall in the abyss, somebody needs to describe things the way they are. There are huge monies, huge resources being sent to create pseudo-reality. And the only service you and I can do to our compatriots is to destroy that pseudo-reality and to show what the real thing is. Because one day, the smoke and mirrors veneer will be gone. And we'll be sitting with the broken house, and I think we'll have it broken over the heads of each other. We'll have to do something with the remnants of Ukraine. We'll either need to liquidate this unsustainable enterprise or start a new one and reopen and try to survive and live. And only relying on reality works. People who ignore reality will make a wrong decision. You cannot make the right decision on a faulty data. It's technically impossible. And our task is to provide the proper data input, at least for those who are ready to listen. Look at my biography, Nikolai. For the first time, I tried to say the truth at 2003, after Tuzla, when I said, this is how Crimea will be captured. And I was called then to our special services, and they threatened me with criminal persecution and that I'm quarreling people, two brotherly people between each other. And then I have a video on my channel 10 years later that I did go over how I predicted the Crimea will be captured. I warned about big war that will happen later, and it happened. Then I talked about the divisions, refitting them, about the drafting, the way we do that. You can write a huge list, earth to sky, of all these warnings. And during all this time, for all the effort, I got maybe a medal for being a traitor who is working for the enemy. And this lasts for, what, 21 years already? I honestly continue to do my work. Honestly telling truth to our people. It's been 21 years. I was told that I should be executed, crucified, my family should be destroyed, my name should be erased from everywhere, and I continue talking. This is my input into our public movement and societal things in Ukraine. I would love to just go completely into audiobooks, into psychology, my school of philosophy and traveling, but unfortunately the anatomy of my soul is set in such a way that I have to be telling the truth. I cannot not be telling it. I have to fight with pseudo-reality. This is my inner setup, damn me. And I have to be telling this truth. But I want to warn you one more time, honestly. A month from now, the agenda will be worse. Okay, worse. How do you mean? How do you see it, Alexey? Oh, we'll do another provocation, and we'll set the whole world and global Yalta against us with all the conclusions coming out of it. And Russia, who is reservedly following these agreements, will get their hands untied, and they will try to use that advantage. Although I think even then they'll probably try to hold themselves. You can consider them to be demons, but they are still conducting the politics in their global interest. And the decision of the Big Yalta is not about Ukraine. This is a decision about the global setting of this world for the next 15, 20 years. And the cost of this question is much higher than just one Ukraine. So I think they'll hold themselves this time, but they will definitely outline that we are insane and we should not be supported. And those countries that are still helping us and sympathizing with us may consider us to be complete idiots, which I'm afraid we often are under current leadership and as a society. And that would be what I think of the worst agenda that we may face about a month from now. End of first hour.